Welcome to a fragment preserved in the Freedmen's Bureau archive dated October 19, 1864. The entry is brief and without context. Sound of the church bell reported at 11:47 p.m., though the building had been destroyed earlier that evening. No personnel accounted for. Residents gone. Bell later found cracked. It appears in a ledger concerning refugee transport near the Tennessee border, yet no corresponding record identifies who filed the report or why it was logged at that hour. The page is clean except for a faint ink smear beside the word freedom. On the reverse side, someone penciled a list of supplies, blankets, cornmeal candles, as if the sound of that bell and the logistics of survival shared the same bureaucratic space. A parallel reference surfaces in a Union quartermaster's log from the same region, same night. Colored troops stationed at the North Ridge heard the ringing too, claimed it was the signal for release. No further orders recorded. The handwriting belongs to Captain L.H. Graves of the 16th Illinois, known for precision and restraint. Yet this entry carries an irregular tremor in the ink, as if the pen hesitated mid-stroke. No follow-up order survives. The unit moved east 2 days later, and the chapel site was marked abandoned. In a soldier's notebook found decades later labeled Private H. Collins, 28th USCT, the phrase reappears. We heard freedom's bell once. Nothing follows. The next page is torn, the paper blackened along its edge, perhaps from moisture, perhaps from fire. There are no coordinates, no name of the settlement, no record of the men who were with him that night. Only that line standing alone in a journal, otherwise filled with rations, marching orders, and the quiet domestic notes of a soldier who could read and write but seldom reflected. 73 years afterward, the same phrase emerged in an oral history collected under the WPA Federal Writers Project. In an interview conducted in Meridian, Mississippi, a woman named Sarah Dunley, born on a plantation near the Alabama line, told the interviewer, "They said the bell rang itself that night long after the men were gone. Folks never stayed there after that." Her memory blended hearsay and rumor, yet she insisted on one image: a bell sounding in a burned church, a sound no one saw made. The transcript ends with the interviewer's note: "Speaker paused here and did not resume for several minutes." Across these scattered traces, ledger, logbook, diary, oral testimony. The same event is described but never explained. No eyewitness ever claimed the act. No officer verified it. No subsequent census lists a surviving settlement. The coordinates of the chapel are lost, its name absent from military maps. Even the bell itself, once logged as damaged property, disappears from later inventories. Only the accounts remain detached yet echoing, joined by a single refrain: the bell rang once and was never heard again. Before we begin, leave a comment where you're watching from and the exact time you paused. What did you feel in that silence? The fragment, commonly referred to as the Bell Entry, first appeared in a bound volume of refugee transportation records maintained by the Bureau of Freedmen, Refugees, and Abandoned Lands. The ledger labeled District Record Book No. 7, Western Tennessee Field Office, covers October to December 1864. The entry concerning the bell is the only non-administrative note on the page. It is signed only with the initials JLM and written in a hand consistent with other bureau clerks operating under Major Samuel T. Lathrop. The original volume now resides in the National Archives Record Group 105, Washington, D.C., in a series cataloged as Miscellaneous Field Reports. Its paper stock matches the government's 1863 standard issue, blue-gray, ruled cotton rag folded in quires of 12. The notation sound of the church bell, "Residents gone," appears between two columns of figures listing wagon allotments and ration counts, suggesting it was entered hastily between routine tallies. A marginal annotation in a separate Bureau correspondence file dated November 2, 1864, refers to a false signal by Negro troops near the North Ridge, apparently caused by church debris. The wording implies the Bureau treated the incident as a misunderstanding, perhaps a misheard echo or spontaneous noise from a collapsing structure. However, the location specified, North Ridge, aligns with known encampments of the 28th United States Colored Troops, a regiment formed at Camp Delaware, Ohio, and deployed to western Tennessee that autumn. Surviving rosters confirm a Private Henry Collins served in Company D. The diary bearing his name was acquired in 1911 by the Tennessee Historical Society from the family of Reverend Amos Langley, who had been chaplain to the regiment. The Society's accession log notes partially burned pocket journal found in box of church papers, St. Anselm's Parish. Reverend Langley's letters to the Bureau, preserved in microfilm roll, M1905-43. mention a chapel near Shiloh constructed from salvaged timbers after the Spring Campaign of 1862. By 1864, it had become a meeting place for freedmen and colored soldiers on Sunday evenings. Local correspondence from a white missionary, Martha Givens, identifies the structure as St. Matthew's Chapel. Her letter dated October 16th, 3 days before the supposed incident, reports tensions between black soldiers stationed nearby and local civilians claiming ownership of the bell. Givens wrote, "The bell was once from a plantation chapel removed when the enslaved took it upon themselves to ring it at midnight. The planters fear it still calls them to rise." The letter is held in the Methodist Missionary Society archives in Baltimore. The oral version of the story appears in a different archive altogether. The Federal Writers Project interview with Sarah Dunley was recorded on August 3, 1937, by fieldworker Thomas E. Wyatt. The typescript filed under Folklore Division Alabama Narratives Volume 2 opens with the interviewer's preamble. Subject claims knowledge of a bell that sounded itself in wartime. Dunley was 89 years old at the time, and the transcript shows numerous pauses indicated by ellipses. The recording equipment of the period dictaphone cylinders was rarely used for field folklore sessions, so no audio survives. The transcript remains the sole evidence of her statement. A pencil note at the bottom reads, "Informant ended abruptly, declined to continue after 2 interruptions." Wyatt's subsequent field correspondence to the Alabama District Supervisor, found in Library of Congress Manuscript Division WPA collection, adds a short remark. "Old woman spoke of soldiers who heard freedom in the bell then gone by morning. Said they never found the man who rang it." This matches the phrasing found in the Freedmen's Bureau ledger, nearly verbatim. Scholars have since debated whether Wyatt had prior knowledge of the archival entry, or if the oral memory persisted independently for 70 years. No documentary link has been proven, but both accounts use the same temporal phrasing: "the bell rang once and was never heard again." The precise coordinates of St. Matthew's Chapel remain uncertain. Civil War maps of Hardin County mark several ridge settlements destroyed between September and November 1864, including a colored camp noted simply as burnt. Archaeological surveys conducted in the 1980s found fragments of bell metal near those coordinates, but could not conclusively tie them to the Freedmen's Bureau incident. The Tennessee State Archaeological Report 1987 Tennessee lists the site under the provisional code HC B47 status undetermined cultural association. The names JLM, Lathrop, Collins, Langley, Givens, and Dunley represent the only traceable human participants in the record chain. Each source exists in isolation. None directly cite the others. The linkage between them is inferential, drawn only through vocabulary repetition and geography. Still, the correspondence of details across bureaucratic and oral layers has led several historians to treat the bell entry as a case study in the overlap between freed people's testimony and federal documentation. The prevailing interpretation holds that a bell once used by enslaved congregants as a covert alarm or gathering signal may have been repurposed during wartime as a symbol of emancipation. The moment its sound was heard after the chapel's destruction thus carried both logistical confusion and spiritual charge. In 1941, the WPA's Regional Folklore Review Board noted that certain motifs in colored narratives, self-ringing bells, marching lights, phantom calls, show continuity with earlier Bureau records. This remark, buried in an administrative memo, marks one of the earliest institutional acknowledgments that bureaucratic files and oral folklore might preserve parallel accounts of the same events. A small but persistent scholarly debate has centered on the figure of Thomas E. Wyatt, the field worker who recorded Dunley's account. He filed his last report in March 1939 from the town of Corinth, Mississippi, documenting stories of unheard music on the road between Shiloh and the river ferry. 2 years later, in 1941, the project's personnel ledger lists his status as location unknown. No resignation letter, death certificate, or forwarding address has been located. The line immediately following his name bears a handwritten note from the district supervisor: Wyatt last seen traveling north on the same ridge road mentioned in report number 122. What remains is an assemblage of paper, ink, and rumor. Every document is traceable, every signature verifiable, yet the total event resists definition. The physical bell may have existed, the sound may have carried through open air or imagination, but the convergence of official record and remembered legend continues to elude final explanation. The field worker who recorded the last living witness vanished 2 years later on the same road. The ledger, the diary, and the testimony remain quiet, factual, incomplete. The administrative trail surrounding the bell widens across scattered archives, each fragment describing absence more than presence. The Nashville Republican Banner issue of October 28, 1864, contains a column of runaway notices from the preceding week. Among them appears one printed in smaller type than the rest. Caleb, age about 30, blacksmith formerly enslaved on the Barton estate, absconded with a group of colored soldiers on the 12th. Known to possess a peculiar knowledge of metalwork and bell tuning. The advertisement offers a reward of $50 for his capture and bears the signature S. Barton. No confirmation exists that Caleb was ever apprehended. Freedmen's Bureau circulars from November mention the confiscation of several plantation bells to prevent their misappropriation for signaling. In the War Department Correspondence Series 1124 file, Colored Troops Western Division, an unsigned field note describes an encounter near Shiloh Herd, repeated metallic sounds though the site had no functioning structure. Believed to be residue from broken bell fragments struck by wind or falling timber. The phrasing betrays uncertainty. The term residue implies echo, yet the writer measures it as a physical vibration. An attached memorandum from Surgeon H.B. Cresswell, dated October 23rd, observes several men of the 28th CT report dreaming the same night of bells ringing overhead. They complained of fatigue and auditory illusion following artillery. In 1872, during Reconstruction hearings before the Congressional Committee on Violations in the Southern States, a witness named Benjamin Hardy, identified as a former sergeant of the U.S. Colored Troops, recalled the incident in testimony preserved in House Report No. 261. "We heard it once, all of us. The captain told us it was the wind in the metal, but I knew that bell. It was the same they took from the field church. They said it cracked because it had been struck too hard." Hardy's statement, buried within pages concerning rations and pay disputes, is never referenced again. The transcript includes no follow-up question. At this point, the record falls silent. The Bureau's final mention of the Ridge settlement appears in March 1865, noting that remnants of chapel removed for military use. No bell inventory accompanies the order. Yet within local oral history the sound persisted. An aged spiritual recorded in 1894 by the ethnographer Lucy McKim Garrison, published later in Slave Songs of the South, bears the refrain, "Once it rung and the night stood still. Once it rung and the hands were still. Once it rung and the Lord say, be still." The song's regional attribution reads only Tennessee River. Scholars have debated whether this spiritual reflects the biblical command to stillness or recalls a specific wartime event. The pattern of repetition, "once it rung," echoes the documentary phrasing from 1864. In oral accounts collected during the 1930s by the WPA Federal Writers Project, the bell surfaces again, recast as a ghost story. Interviewee Martha Clay, then 91, told interviewer Pearl McCoy, "My daddy say they hear the free bell in the war. It cry one time and all them soldiers walk out the fog. They say they was ghosts, but they feet still wet." McCoy annotated in brackets, "Possible confusion with church bells used by freed people." The tone of these recollections blends the mundane and the supernatural without clear division. In one Alabama narrative, a man describes dreaming of a field turning to brass and hearing a single toll meant for them who cross. Another speaker, identified only as Aunt Nola, calls it the bell of them gone missing. Within African American folklore of the Reconstruction era, the bell motif often signified transition between bondage and freedom, life and death, presence and disappearance. The juxtaposition of bureaucratic record and folk narrative creates an uneasy symmetry. The official accounts insist on cause, wind collapse, resonance, while the vernacular memory insists on agency, that something or someone chose to ring. No document describes who built the bell or why it was salvaged. But in plantation inventories before the war, bells served as instruments of control to summon labor to signal curfew to mark births and deaths. Their sound carried authority. To ring such a bell without permission, as Martha Givens wrote, was an act of defiance. From this tension emerges the superstition recorded in Freedmen testimony. Docket number 22, filed June 1865 at Corinth. A freedman named Elias Rowe deposed, "They told me not to touch the old bell, for it belonged to the dead. Say the crack come from a spirit trying to climb out." The clerk appended a note, "Witness appears lucid, though fearful. Belief of haunting common among colored refugees." Even in the dry precision of the court's handwriting, one senses discomfort. The phrase "appears lucid, though fearful" reflects an official vocabulary unwilling to engage with meaning beyond observation. Yet these testimonies survive precisely because they were written down by those who neither believed nor disbelieved. In a letter from a white missionary, Reverend Charles M. Baird, to the American Missionary Record dated 1866, the story is reframed in theological terms. The colored brethren persist in assembling at the ruins of their chapel, claiming to hear a tone in the air. Whether it be memory or delusion, I cannot say. I noted only that their faith clings to sound as others to sight. His letter closes with a cautionary line, "One must not argue with those who have heard a call." By the late 19th century, references to the bell had entered collections of Negro superstitions. Folklorist A.E. Davenport, writing in 1899, categorized it under spontaneous instruments, auditory phenomena, alongside stories of phantom drums and invisible choirs. He quotes an anonymous informant that bell done call the living twice and the dead once. The phrasing mirrors the cadence of the spiritual once it rung. In 1915, a short article in the Journal of Southern History attempted to reconcile these accounts. The author-historian William Petty argued that a combination of atmospheric inversion and damaged metal could explain the acoustic illusion. His paper cites meteorological data showing temperature shifts in the Tennessee Valley that could have amplified echoes. Yet his closing sentence betrays unease. The persistence of this singular note through multiple generations of colored testimony suggests less an illusion than a collective insistence. Between the official and the remembered lies what archivists later termed a song of truths. On one page, a bureau clerk notes sound of church bell reported. On another, a woman sings once it rung. Between them stretches a silence filled with interpretations scientific, spiritual, and ancestral. The administrative tone quantifies absence. The folk memory translates it into warning. Dream testimonies collected from descendants in the 1930s extend the motif further. One respondent, Ezekiel Granger, grandson of a Union cook, stated, "My granddaddy say he dream of the bell every spring, say it ring from underwater, calling him to look back." The interviewer notes he refused to sleep near the river afterward. Another, Lena Brooks, claimed she saw a light flicker like fireflies each time someone mentioned the ridge. Her statement concludes, "That's them who didn't get to hear it again." Such fragments may appear peripheral, but when assembled, they outline a pattern of persistence, the bell as both artifact and echo. The Freedmen's Bureau sought to catalog property and movement. The people it recorded sought to catalog memory. Their records overlap briefly, then diverge again into paper and voice. If there is a core truth, it may reside not in the mechanics of metal vibration, but in the act of recording itself. Every ledger line and every sung verse performs the same gesture, a reach toward confirmation that something once happened, something not entirely physical, yet not entirely imagined. By the time the Bureau closed its Tennessee offices in 1872, the bell had disappeared from inventory lists. Yet the sound remained alive in field chants and in whispered warnings told to children, "Never stand near a cracked bell after dark, for it remembers the ones who rang it." In the archive, these warnings survive as annotations dismissed as superstition. In the folklore, they survive as faith disguised as fear. Both are testimonies, both insist that silence itself was once broken by a single note, and that the world has been listening for its echo ever since. Report, October 21, 1864. Site examined at dawn. Chapel destroyed by fire. No survivors were found. Oral record collected 1937. But the drums still answered that night. They said the sound rolled down the ridge like soldiers coming home. Two lines that cannot coexist, written 73 years apart. The Bureau's entry concludes a case. The woman's voice reopens it. Between them lies the night itself, unverified, unending. Each time the record closes, the memory begins again. Bureau file WT-12, 1864 states plainly sound was likely wind pressure through residual metal fragments. No human presence detected. But the missionary Martha Givens, writing that same morning, reported colored women claimed to have seen light from the hill and to hear voices saying, "We done been counted." The two statements were filed under different headings, structural observation and native testimony. They describe the same hour, the same coordinates, yet neither acknowledges the other. Both remain intact, preserved side by side, refusing to merge. The paper holds two worlds equally legible, equally alone. Court transcript, Freedmen testimony. Docket 23 question. Were any soldiers alive? Answer. I seen smoke and I heard they names spoke in the bell. The next line is missing. Only one word remains, returned. No context explains whether returned meant rescued, remembered, or reburied. In the archive, ambiguity is the only survivor. Army Signal Corps communication log, 2300 hours, 00 and hours. Unknown metallic interference noted. No friendly transmission identified. Half a century later, in oral recollection, the phrase transforms. They was beating on pans and barrels to answer the bell. In one account, the sound is distortion. In the other, devotion. Each insists on truth. Neither cancels the other. Somewhere in that static history hums and memory drums. Officers report to division headquarters post abandoned without incident. Yet a plantation ledger from the same county notes repair of iron gate, removal of bell frame, purchase of new lock. The administrative language speaks of closure. The economic record speaks of containment. What was being locked, property ruin or rumor, is unstated. Every archive hides an intention behind its neutrality. The Freedmen's Bureau closure inventory of 1871 lists the Ridge property as returned to private owner. The owner's name is washed away by water stains. Only one bell cracked remains in the margin. 10 years later, preacher John Gant writes of a family story. My granddaddy heard the Lord's medal calling the free. The line ends abruptly. It told not for death, but for... The page is torn. History does not erase, it frays. Bureau addendum unsigned. No trace of sound confirmed. Native informants unreliable. WPA Field Note 1939. Informant insists the ridge hums when the air is damp. Says that's them trying again. Two investigators separated by 75 years listening to the same silence. One labels it error, the other endurance. The paper rustles differently when belief is transcribed. War Department property return March 1865. Bell transferred to Ordnance Depot for smelting. Missionary Given's private note contradicts it. The bell refused to melt. A foundryman reportedly said it split instead of softening. The technical report meant to verify this is lost. Only request denied survives. The contradiction remains on file, unresolved, uninvestigated. Official Bureau memorandum, chapel ruins cleared. All materials accounted for. Oral memory, Harriet McCree, age 90. My grands say they buried the bell in the pit with them. No burial record exists. The site is now pasture land. Yet rainfall still exposes small shards of bronze. Each storm becomes an exhumation the archives never planned. Letter from Lieutenant J.W. Clay, Union Engineer, sound consistent with shifting rubble. Letter from Reverend Langley. Same date I walked the ground and felt something vibrate under the ash. Their observations align yet disagree on what moves. To one, vibration is physics, to the other, presence. Neither could prove, both recorded, both endure. The Memphis Daily Appeal. November 1864 prints rumor of haunted bell unfounded. No such structure existed. Opposite that column, 5 unnamed colored soldiers listed missing after the Shiloh fire. Negation and absence share a page without noticing each other. The printing press preserved both disbelief and disappearance in the same breath. Parish Report, 1875, new bell installed at St. Matthew's successor parish. Annotation in the margin, old bell never delivered. In 1892, a hymn from Corinth repeats, Lord, don't send the new bell down, the old one still calling underground. Records rebuild what stories refuse to replace. 1901, census, no settlement recorded on Ridge Road. That same year's postal survey lists Bell Crossing as a name on route map. There is no building, no clerk, only the title. When maps forget names, remember. Tennessee Historical Society, Box 19, diary fragment attributed to Collins. Final page indecipherable. Word frequency analysis shows heard repeated 6 times. Archivists note paper water damaged. Echo effect suspected. Sometimes even ink imitates sound. Oral witness Ezekiel Granger, 1938, they say the bell had a man's face on it. Every time thunder come, it open its mouth. Interviewer's annotation. Subject claims imprint seen on metal. Verification impossible, bell not located. The Bureau dismissed apparitions. Folklore documented their anatomy. Between both versions, an image forms only when neither insists. Military Addendum number 43, chapel coordinates rechecked. Only foundation stones found. Same day's entry in a family Bible. This night the ground spoke. The ledger ends, the lineage continues. One book measures land, the other remembers it. Final microfilm frame, Freedmen Bureau material deemed of no further relevance. WPA folklore catalog, same number. When the bell stopped, something else started walking. By coincidence or repetition, the page numbers align. The archives close exactly where the stories begin. Civilian Conservation Corps Report 1943, fragments of bronze recovered. Alloy inconsistent with Tennessee manufacture. Sentence cuts midway. Trace of human ash. probable. The rest is trimmed by the typewriter's edge. Absence enters the file as evidence. 1958. Historian Clara Ransom. Journal of Southern Documentation. No event verified. Same year, oral witness, Lena Brooks, age 97. Don't need paper. I heard it. One statement ends a study. The other begins belief. Neither disproves the other. Both survive as echo in ink. Between the clerk's ledgers and the elders' voices, a gap remains measurable only by silence. Report. No survivors were found. Oral record. But the drums still answered that night. The next memorandum in the Bureau file is blank except for one penciled word, returned. No explanation follows. The record stops there. The folklore does not. The first Reconstruction census after the war lists more absences than names. On the Bureau's 1866 map of the western Tennessee districts, the area once marked as colored settlement near Ridge Chapel is crossed through in faint blue ink. Beneath the strikeout appears a notation added months later, area resettled by 18 families of freed people migrating northward. No explanation for the resettlement is given, but in a letter preserved in the Bureau's correspondence file, an agent named Samuel T. Lathrop writes, "The ridge is quiet now. Those who left say they heard it still." He refers not to gunfire, but to the bell. In the same folder lies a second map drawn by an unknown clerk that extends the migration routes north into Kentucky, each line beginning at the ridge marked by small ink crosses instead of arrows. The cartographer added one curious annotation at the bottom. Those who claim to hear the bell first, also the first to leave. The phrasing is neither bureaucratic nor neutral. It sits on the edge between observation and belief, as though geography itself could remember. A newspaper published in Paducah, dated August 1866, records the arrival of a group of colored refugees from the southern ridges. The reporter, unsigned, describes them as quiet, carrying few possessions, speaking of a burned church they dare not pass again. The article lists 21 names. Half appear later in a Freedmen's Bureau payroll from Cairo, Illinois. The final line of the report adds, their leader, called Caleb the Smith, claimed he forged a bell that should never be struck again. In the Bureau inventory, no such man is listed. From the Reconstruction hearing, Senate document 241, 1871, a witness named Benjamin Hardy, already encountered in earlier testimony, is called again. His statement now reads, "We was paid at Shiloh Station. We marched once more up that road. The ground there felt hollow underfoot. When asked to clarify, he answers only, 'It was not the ground, sir. It was what's underneath.'" The stenographer's note ends abruptly, "Witness excused due to illness." The same year, the Western Missionary Journal prints a report from Reverend Amos Langley. A number of freedmen refused to camp near the ruins. They speak of a sound at dusk, like iron under water. The Reverend attributes it to local fancy, but adds, "It stirs even the skeptical heart to wonder." In the folklore archives, the oral record continues this migration. A spiritual collected in 1889 at a church along the Ohio River bears the refrain, "Don't ring no more that freedom bell." The Lord done carried the sound to tell. We walk from dust, we walk from flame, we walk till the ground remember our name. The melody, according to the collector, was sung in a slow triple time with one line hummed in place of lyrics now forgotten. Scholars later identified fragments of its structure in postbellum church music, but none could trace its original composer. The song travels the same direction as the map lines from the South Ridge toward the North Echo without author. In 1873, the Memphis Reconstruction Court processed the estate of plantation owner Stephen Barton, who had once placed the runaway notice for Caleb the blacksmith. Among the property listed, one cracked bronze bell damaged by heat. The judge's notation reads, "Value negligible. Ordered melted." A marginal comment, likely from a clerk, adds, "Foundry reports bell shattered upon striking." The official verdict is mechanical failure. The timing coincides exactly with Langley's account of iron under water. The cause dissolves into repetition. During this same decade, freed people in the region began an annual observance known as the Night of the Toll, held each October. According to missionary correspondence, participants gathered silently, standing in circles, humming a single low tone. The Bureau's successor agency recorded the event as religious assembly without scripture. To the attendees, it was remembrance. To the clerks, a statistic. Each entry lists numbers present, candles burned, and distance walked. Nowhere is belief mentioned, only movement. In 1895, a teacher named Mary Ellen Rhodes, working under the American Missionary Society, described attending one such vigil. Her report notes, "They say the bell sound travels underfoot, not through air. They listen with their souls." She sketches the gathering no central object, only earth. The following spring, the church school she helped establish was renamed Bell Ground School, though no bell was ever installed. The records of the dedication contain the same line 3 times written in different hands, silence kept as offering. Fact and folklore begin to reflect one another more directly in the 20th century when researchers sought to reconcile the fragments. In 1922, the Journal of Southern Folklife published an article titled "The Shiloh Bell Legend." The author-historian Joseph E. Kendall reprinted excerpts from both Bureau reports and WPA interviews, aligning them in 2 columns, official and oral, without commentary. His introduction reads only, "What one side records, the other side remembers." He died the following year, leaving no addendum. In the right column of his article appears Sarah Dunley's line, "They said the bell rang itself that night." In the left, the Freedmen's Bureau phrase sound reported no personnel accounted for. The mirrored structure turns one into the echo of the other. The report explains nothing, the testimony elaborates everything, yet they complete a single rhythm paper and breath ledger and hymn. The 1930s WPA spiritual collections expand that rhythm further. In a notebook from field worker Thomas E. Wyatt, who later vanished, a passage reads, "Dreamed again of that place. Heard a hum below me like the ground thinking. It is unclear whether this was his dream or that of a witness, but the handwriting matches his field notes." In another margin, the single word, "returned," appears again just as it did in the Lost Bureau docket. 2 eras, 1 identical residue. In a separate folder, interviewee Hester Baines tells Wyatt, "My mama say every man that heard that bell, he still walked the road in his sleep. She say they trying to get back to finish the ring." Wyatt underlines "finish the ring" twice. No annotation follows. Another narrative from the same session records a ritual. They take water from the ridge well, pour it on the ground, and say a name. This act, documented as folk baptism variant, mirrors the 1860s court testimony in which freedmen refused to camp on the site. What once was avoidance becomes reverence. What once was absence becomes attendance. A century of documentation circles the same silence. The Bureau's coordinates turn to ghost roads. The freed people's hymns become data for ethnographers. Yet in both collections, the word heard recurs with disproportionate frequency, more than seen, more than found. Hearing defines existence. Silence denies it. By 1940, when folklorist John Lomax recorded field spirituals in northern Mississippi, one unidentified singer performed a tune labeled "The Bell That Wouldn't Die." The lyrics, indistinct, repeat the phrase, "still its sound." The disc is damaged. Midway, the sound collapses into static, leaving only a faint vibration captured on wax. Engineers describe it as groove echo. Others hear breathing. The final Reconstruction-era document mentioning the ridge site appears in 1874, decades before Lomax's cylinder. Yet its closing line seems to anticipate the recording. Sound persists, though source unknown. The archivist's pencil note below reads, "Filed under anomalies." The classification remains to this day. Fact and folklore meet not through agreement, but through reflection, each casting back the other's shape. The Bureau writes absent. The singer answers still here. The map shows exodus. The spiritual hums return. The bell cracks in the inventory. The bell rings in the hymn. The report ends. The ritual begins. One language measures disappearance, the other measures endurance, and in their crossing a truth neither intended emerges. What is recorded cannot stay still, and what is remembered cannot stay silent. Thus, by the end of Reconstruction, the ridge ceases to appear on maps yet continues to exist in songs. The bell's coordinates vanish from property ledgers yet survive in prayer. A freedman's signature fades from ink but resurfaces in refrain. In 1864, they wrote, "No survivors were found." In 1937, they sang, "We done been counted." The mirror closes between them, 2 halves of a record staring at their own reflection, one in paper, one in air, both still ringing. In the final ledger of the Freedmen's Bureau dated March 1868, the line concerning the ridge property is struck through twice and annotated simply, "All matters resolved." Below it in lighter ink, someone has added a note barely legible. A clerk's hand, no one later identified. Sound reported again at River Crossing. There is no attached memorandum, no explanation, no coordinates. The phrase remains orphaned, a fragment of repetition written 3 years too late. A report from the Memphis Missionary Society, preserved in its 1870 annual summary, refers to recurring noises from the valley believed to be frogs or drums from distant encampments. The record ends mid-sentence. Heard after the rain around midnight, though no regiment stationed nearby. This is the last official document to acknowledge the phenomenon without ridicule. Every reference afterward moves it into rumor, then erasure. At the same time, field correspondents of the Reconstruction courts were ordered to record freed people's gatherings, especially those considered political or religious. One such file, Case 19A, describes a night meeting by the riverbank. The agent writes, "Participants stood in silence for near 1 hour, no speech delivered, then a single rhythmic pounding as of drum or tool. When questioned, a witness replied, 'We was listening, not playing.' No charge was filed." In oral collections compiled half a century later, the same riverbank returns. An informant named Hattie Lee, interviewed in 1936, told the WPA interviewer, "They say the ridge washed into that river, but the sounds still travel upstream. You hear it at night like someone hammering under the water." The interviewer's transcript ends there. The machine jammed. In the margin, another hand notes, "Cylinder broken, no audio preserved." The bell reappears once more in the Reconstruction letters of Reverend Langley. In an unsent draft found among his papers, he writes, "They gathered again last Sabbath not to ring but to listen. The silence itself felt shaped like sound." Beneath this sentence, he sketches a circle with a line through it. Some historians later read it as a symbol for a cracked bell, others as a clerical flourish. There is no way to know which. A different fragment from the 1870s shows silence entering the record as evidence. A bureau auditor rechecking supply logs finds a blank space where the bell inventory should be. His notation reads, "Item lost or struck." No replacement line follows. The ledger jumps to candles and paper as though a void had been properly accounted for. In the archive, absence becomes a category. The oral side continues in counterpoint. During the 1930s, ethnographers transcribing dream testimonies in Mississippi collected recurring imagery of water, light, and metal. One informant recounted, "I seen a river full of sound. You could walk on it if you don't speak." Another said, "Every dream, same place, dark water, and somebody ringing from the bottom." The researchers grouped these under water bell sequence, unaware of any connection to the Freedmen's Bureau files. The classification itself creates the link they missed. Fact and folklore begin to fold into each other until each reads as commentary on the other's silence. The Bureau ceased its functions in 1872. The oral recordings began in 1936. Between them, 64 years of unrecorded echo. In that space, the story moves from history to inheritance. A memorandum from 1905, written by an archivist at the Tennessee Historical Society, notes, "Repeated attempts to locate the bell site have failed. Local residents refer to it as the listening ground." The archivist does not explain the name. The next page of the file is blank except for the notation "index ends." The folklore archives pick up the thread 20 years later. Interviewee Lena Brooks, already elderly, speaks softly into the cylinder microphone. "They stopped ringing a long time ago. Now it just answers itself. When it rained, the dirt sound like drum skin." The transcriber adds in brackets, "Inaudible hum follows." That hum remains on the surviving recording, a steady low tone, mechanical or natural, impossible to remove. From these fragments, the same pattern emerges. The official voice stops. The remembered voice continues. In Reconstruction files, every mention of bell ends with destroyed, lost, or returned. In spiritual lyrics, every line ends with still. The two forms of record move in opposite directions, yet they meet in repetition. A Freedmen's song transcribed in 1866 reads, "Once I heard it, never no more. Once I heard it, never no more." A WPA version from 1938 repeats, "Still it sound, still it sound." No author connects them, but their cadence is identical. Paper and voice complete the same circle of return. In the final Reconstruction dispatch, preserved on microfilm reel 411, an unidentified clerk writes, "Night of 24th, silence reported." The line appears beneath unrelated requisition data as if inserted absent-mindedly. The handwriting suggests Lathrop's successor, Major Crane. His notation, though brief, becomes the closing of a system built on sound. The record does not fade. It pauses. After that, the archives fall quiet. Reports cease. Letters stop. The ridge is renamed for agriculture, then erased by flood maps. Only the oral witnesses keep speaking. In their retellings, the motifs Bell River Drum Dream begin to exchange places. One version says the drum sank into the river. Another says the river itself became the bell. A third insists the bell rang only once, and what people now hear is the echo still traveling through time. Each story repeats the earlier one without knowing it, as if language were learning its own reverberation. By the mid-20th century, the Folklore Project records have absorbed the cadence of the Bureau itself, clipped, factual, unembellished. Yet within that restraint, silence takes on pattern. Every entry ends with something missing: a page torn, a cylinder broken, a word indecipherable. Each absence sounds like what preceded it. The archive, without intending, begins to imitate the phenomenon it documents. In a final oral account collected in 1941, an unnamed speaker concludes, "Ain't nobody write about it no more." But the drums kept answering. The transcriber underlines "kept answering," then leaves the page blank beneath it. That blank is the longest pause in the record. In 1972, the National Archives and Records Service reclassified a group of post-Civil War Bureau files long mislabeled as miscellaneous Reconstruction papers. Within that group was Record Box 7C, containing the same ledger that once bore the single line "Sound of the Church Bell" reported at 11:47 p.m. The box arrived from the Tennessee Field Depository after an internal audit revealed discrepancies in catalog numbering. Its cardboard edges were darkened by mildew, its string binding replaced during preservation. On the inside cover, a note in blue ink reads, "Contents previously unprocessed, origin uncertain." The archivist who opened it, Dr. Elaine Morrison, compiled the first cross-reference between the Bureau's reports, the Freedmen's Bureau maps, and the WPA oral histories. Her memorandum, dated April 1973, lists 3 convergences of data: a ridge settlement destroyed by fire in October 1864, a burned church associated with the 28th United States Colored Troops, and oral testimonies recurring along the Tennessee River between 1936 and 1941. Morrison labeled the correlation coincidental but consistent. The report was filed circulated to the Bureau of Ethnology and never formally published. 2 decades later, in 1994, a graduate researcher from Howard University, Marcus Dunn, revisited Morrison's findings while compiling a dissertation on Reconstruction cartography. He located the faint blue crosses on the Bureau's 1866 map, the ones tracing the exodus northward, and realized that each cross aligned with early black settlements that later formed the route known colloquially as the Freedom Line. Dunn observed that the pattern began at the same ridge where the bell had once been reported. His thesis echoes in the archive argued that the freed people left behind a geography of sound. The phrase never gained academic traction, but the term reappears in later folklore studies. By the early 2000s, digital archivists began scanning the Bureau's ledgers into online repositories. During the digitization process, preservationists noted irregular marks on several pages surrounding the bell entry, small circular stains resembling ink rings. Spectrographic analysis identified traces of oxidized bronze within the fibers, as if the paper itself had once been in contact with metal. The anomaly remains unexplained. Official reports call it environmental contamination. No one has located the bell. Meanwhile, folklore studies treat the same object as a migrating symbol. In collections of African American spirituals published between 1930 and 1960, the bell appears interchangeably with the drum, the river, and the dream. Each functions as both sound and threshold, a medium through which those lost might answer. The bell's tone becomes the drum's rhythm becomes the river's current. The current carries the dream. Every retelling rearranges the elements but keeps the motion intact. The academic record isolates events. The oral tradition fuses them. In 2010, a restoration team from the University of Memphis located fragments of transcribed interviews once conducted by the WPA fieldworker Thomas E. Wyatt. The pages had been misfiled under regional myths. On the final sheet, Wyatt's last legible note reads, "Followed the ridge road. Heard something low like thunder, though sky was clear. Stopped the car. Couldn't tell if it was near or beneath." His signature ends the entry. Below it, a later hand, perhaps an archivist, adds the word "unverified." Today, the Bureau ledgers, the WPA transcripts, and the missionary letters are housed across 3 institutions: the National Archives in Washington, the Tennessee State Library and Archives, and the Library of Congress Folklife Division. None of them contain a full account. The materials intersect only through references to the same absence. The bell's physical existence remains unproven. The oral record remains irreducible. Between them, an entire century of documentation describes the same silence without resolving it. Visitors who read the scanned pages online often comment on the peculiar formatting. The digital image of the bell entry, even when magnified, seems to show a faint line running beneath the ink, not an underline, more like a vibration caught on paper. Archivists attribute it to uneven scanning. Others call it an echo. The interpretation depends on the reader's willingness to hear. One can trace the entire story through the evolution of phrasing. 1864, sound of the church bell reported. 1871, witnesses claim sound persisted after destruction. 1937, they said the bell rang itself that night. 1941, ain't nobody write about it no more, but the drums kept answering. Each iteration distills the same motif sound without source endurance, without proof. The archive repeats its own contradiction, turning absence into evidence. Fact and folklore have by now exchanged roles. The documents become myths of verification. The oral accounts become records of memory. The archivist's silence carries the same weight as the singer's note. Each keeps the other alive by refusing to conclude. The Bureau meant to document emancipation. Instead, it archived an unanswered call. In the present, a simple philosophical reversal arises. The question is no longer whether the bell rang, but who was listening when it did. The records assume that sound occurred once and ended. The folklore assumes that sound never stopped, only changed form. Somewhere between those assumptions, the listener disappears. The modern reconstruction of the site in Hardin County reveals nothing, no artifacts, no foundation, no trace of bronze. But every spring when the ground softens after rain, the soil shifts slightly, producing a hollow vibration. Geological surveys identify it as air moving through subsurface cavities left by erosion. Locals call it the hum. When asked, they mention the same phrase heard across generations, still its sound. In the microfilm's closing frame, the final legible sentence written by an unknown clerk reads, "No further activity recorded." The next reel begins decades later with a different hand, a different voice recording a song. Once it rung and the night stood still. What remains uncertain is not the event itself, but our capacity to hear it. The bell, the drum, the river, the dream all return as mirrors. Each reflects the listener's absence. The archive holds paper, the memory holds air. Both vibrate when touched. No one wrote again, but the drums kept answering. The pattern completes its circle. The echo becomes the record. The silence becomes the testimony. The event never closed. Only the audience did. Maybe they didn't disappear. Maybe we did. And perhaps that is the real legacy of the Ridge, that history is not only what survives on paper, but what still replies when no one is calling. The past does not vanish. It waits in the silence between the last report and the next breath, where memory and fact hum in the same key, and every unanswered sound becomes its own form of remembrance. Between those two lines, an official silence and a remembered echo stretches the distance of an entire century.